So my name is Lisa Gutzon. I'm the Executive Director of Citizens for Public Schools, and I'll be your MC for this morning's event. I'll say a few words, kind of framing the issue, making our main points, and we have a wonderful panel of speakers. We'll hear from all of them, and then there'll be time for questions from the press. So last November, Massachusetts voters rejected the one-size-fits-all MCAS graduation requirement by a vote of 59 to 41%. The margin was widest in racially diverse cities and towns, such as Springfield, New Bedford, and Pittsfield. In some cities and towns, the vote was as high as 75% yes on question 2. Ending the MCAS graduation requirement created an amazing opportunity for us as a Commonwealth to look carefully at what critical skills our young people need for the 21st century. This was a great time to promote public dialogue about what we truly value and build consensus around a so-called portrait of a graduate, which a number of other states have already done. This common vision would then inform and guide both our instructional and our assessment practices. Unfortunately, rather than seizing upon this opportunity, the state seems to be rushing to come up with another standardized way to decide that a student has earned a high school diploma. In January, Governor Healy formed a 31-member commission on graduation requirements. One of its first tasks was to find out what Massachusetts residents want students to know and be able to do. The commission held 6 in-person and 2 online hearings. In addition to that, my organization, Citizens for Public Schools, along with more than 35 other education and community groups, organized a series of people's forums around the state to invite students, parents, teachers, elected leaders, and community members to get together in small group discussions and answer 3 questions. What should students know and be able to do by the time they graduate from high school? How should students demonstrate their readiness to graduate? What should high school look like to prepare students for your recommended graduation requirements? Participants across the state, both in our people's forums and the Governor's Council's listening sessions, had very similar ideas. They wanted students to develop a wide range of skills and capacities, most of which cannot be measured with a multiple choice standardized exam like MCAS. People prioritize life skills such as critical thinking, communication, problem solving, along with financial, media, and digital literacy. Civic knowledge and participation was another major priority that people spoke about. Participants emphasized the importance of collaboration, students' awareness of their own strengths and weaknesses, and respecting diverse cultures and different opinions. Participants recognized that these kinds of skills are not measured by standardized tests. In fact, they realized that that kind of testing worked in direct opposition to these goals. Recognizing the diverse strengths, interests, and goals of our public school students, participants saw the need to offer multiple measures and pathways to graduation. They emphasized the need to focus on student work, projects, portfolios, capstone projects, and performance-based assessments. Looking forward to schools that can deliver high-quality learning experiences for every student, participants in every location emphasized the fundamental and still unmet need for adequate educational funding and resources statewide. They want schools to have the staffing and capacity to support student agency, passion, engagement, teacher professionalism, and autonomy. We shared our results after each forum with Education Secretary Patrick Tutwiler, members of the Governor's Council, the Massachusetts Board of Education, and the Joint Committee on Education members. Secretary Tutwiler responded graciously that the Governor's Council listening sessions were hearing similar calls for deeper learning that nurtures critical thinking. Unfortunately, what the state has proposed for graduation requirements, particularly end-of-course tests developed and scored by the state, does not support the vision of a graduate that the state itself has developed. And we know that the Mass Association of School Committees representative on the Governor's Council recently put out a very strong statement opposing statewide standardized end-of-course exams. Our question is, given the broad consensus about what we want students to know and be able to do, why is the Governor's Council proposing that we return to the same ideas for measuring readiness to graduate that the voters and the participants in our forums and their own listening sessions rejected? Instead, we propose the following course of action to improve K-12 education. First, districts should adopt multiple ways for students to demonstrate graduation readiness, including capstone projects, portfolios, and other ways to assess both skills and knowledge. New statewide course requirements that can be considered but must be flexible enough to allow exemplary and interdisciplinary ways to teach content, including with career technical education, international baccalaureate schools, and other innovative programs. The state's role should be to provide support for local development of assessments. Any new requirements must allow time for educators and their students to make the changes with adequate funding for professional development and experimental programs. In the packets that are over there, if you haven't already taken one, there's a summary of our main conclusions, a brief report on the People's Forums, and a summary of the responses we've gotten to the 3 questions during the forums. And now I'm very excited to introduce our wonderful speakers this morning. We have education professor and author John Mehta, high school teacher Eric Fearing, Boston parent Zulega Soto. We were going to have recent high school grad and Harvard College student Soleil West, but unfortunately her mother is in the hospital, so she sends her regrets. We'll have from the MTA, Max Page and Deb McCarthy, and Grant Duncan is here representing AFT of Massachusetts. And then I'll introduce each of them before they speak, and then after all the speakers, we will gladly take your questions. So, John Mehta is the Gregory R. Andrick Professor of Educational Leadership at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. He's the author of 5 books, including with Sarah Fine, In Search of Deeper Learning, The Quest to Remake the American High School. So very relevant to what we're talking about today. He's the founder and faculty director of the Harvard Deeper Learning Institute, and he works with schools, districts, states, and provinces that are seeking to provide purposeful and passionate learning for all students. He's also the proud recipient of the Morningstar Award for Outstanding Teaching at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and John's essay on deeper learning was provided to members of the Governor's Council members as a model. So I turn it over to John.
Thank you, Lisa. Good morning, everybody. How is everybody? Good morning. Good. All right, so I think we have a real opportunity to reestablish our role as a national leader in K-12 education. So let's think about the world our students are in, right? So one where social media and online disinformation is rampant, high political polarization, increasingly sophisticated artificial intelligence, climate change, unprecedented disparities in wealth between rich and poor, and many more complexities that we all deal with every day. So, what would you need to navigate that kind of world? Students will need to be able to think critically, make discerning judgments, work with others, particularly across lines of difference, self-regulate, collaborate, communicate, and much more. The state has adopted a portrait of a graduate, which, in my view, quite sensibly reflects these capacities. So our task now is to build an education system that will help produce young people who have these capacities. And doing this will require, first and foremost, capable and imaginative teachers who can immerse students in environments that regularly ask them to practice these varied and demanding skills. The assessment system needs to be aligned with this kind of education. So as Lisa said, the proposal for this kind of end-of-course assessments does not meet this test and would take us backwards. It not only ignores the will of the voters, who by a 60-40 margin rejected the use of high-stakes graduation tests, they would also catapult us backwards to a world of test prep for relatively low-level knowledge. I might note that New York, after 160 years, is finally moving away from its regents. So it would be very ironic that if in our effort to institute 21st century education, we drew on a system that was established in 1865. For the purposes of this room, it'd be like trading Theo Epstein for Brian Cashman. Just develop our own way of going. So instead, the role of the state is to build an ambitious ecosystem. Right? So the state is not going to micromanage everything, but it can set sort of challenging goals. We want higher standards that reflect authentic work, that challenges teachers in schools, and that's what they've done in other states and provinces with which I work, like Kentucky or British Columbia. Such a system includes a range of assessments, not a single pencil and paper test, and most critically, these assessments are authentic. So they might include a student submitting a long essay or a historical paper that they've written, or an original scientific investigation that demonstrates their understanding of the scientific method, or a civic action project where they've tried to make change in their local community. You can't teach to a test for these kinds of assessments. They grow out of authentic and meaningful work that students are doing. If we want deeper learning, we need deeper forms of assessment. In the book that Lisa mentioned that Sarah and I wrote on deeper learning, one thing we observed was that it was often what we called the periphery of the school. Clubs, extracurriculars, and electives, where students were engaged in their deepest learning. These were the spaces where they were passionate about what they were doing, where they had assumed leadership roles, where they learned through doing, and where assessment meant more than just studying for a test. It's possible to create the same kind of learning in our core classes, and many of our most talented teachers already do so, but it requires giving teachers some space and discretion, the opportunity to balance breadth with depth, and most importantly, for students to produce work that's authentic and meaningful. And to do that, we need assessments that would support such an approach. Finally, I want to say a word about equity. One of the arguments of MCAS proponents is that by having everyone take, or in this case, and of course, assessment proponents, is that by having everyone take one test, we will avoid lowering the bar for our most disadvantaged and disengaged students. This theory has been tested over many years, and the result is that the students in the poorest schools get the most rote learning, the most test prep, whereas those in more affluent spaces where students will clearly pass the test are the students who receive a more well-rounded and holistic education. If we really want to reach the disengaged learners, they are the ones who are most in need of reinvention. These are the students who are hurt most when school becomes a test prep factory, and who most need deep relationships with teachers, opportunities to follow their interests, and chances to connect their subjects to real-world concerns. If we really care about these students, let's design a system that has a real chance of engaging them in our education. Amen.
Thank you for that job. Next we have Eric Fearing, who has been an alternative high school math and science teacher in Revere for 22 years. He's now a special education teacher at City Lab and serves on the governing board of the Massachusetts Consortium for Innovative Education Assessment, also known as MCIEA. As Revere Teachers Association president from 2014 to 2020, Eric was a founding member of MCIEA and part of Revere Public Schools' Deeper Learning Leadership Team. So we have a theme going here. Since then, he has continued to be an advocate for teachers and for non-traditional students. Recently, he worked on the RPS Strategic Planning Committee, which committed to deliver effective, deeper learning experiences for all students in the city. In 2022, he was on the City-led Innovation School conversion team, opening a student-centered high school where the instructional vision focuses on experiential learning in the classroom and at partner locations around Greater Boston. So welcome, Eric.
Good morning. Good morning. I've been a math teacher in Revere for over 20 years, as Lisa said, and I spent my early career preparing struggling students to pass the grade 10 MCAS. I saw what that did to my curriculum. When the hard line barrier to graduation is a mediocre grade on a standardized test, schools' reaction for the students who need us the most is to narrow the focus down to mastery of the minimum. Teachers feel pressure. Whole classes are scheduled to cover only the most testable material, the simplest procedures for the most predictable questions, not the deeper reasoning and creativity that real learning requires and that every student deserves. Voters' repeal of the MCAS graduation requirement recognized that taking an Algebra 2 class is more important than taking 2 years of extra test strategy courses. As a professional, I've seen it, and I know that state-run end-of-course assessments are the wrong choice. Portfolios and capstones are assessments which honor students' identities, draw on their strengths, and make learning visible in ways that standardized tests never could. Well-designed performance tasks leverage students' diverse assets as a foundation and a motivation for them to do their best work. Students will go above and beyond what we need them to do, becoming creative problem solvers and self-aware navigators, part of the vision of a graduate, when they are engaged with work that interests them. Not every grade 9 student is particularly fond of math class, but for years now, I've seen genuine joy as students approach challenges like writing their own business plan to present to a teacher Shark Tank. Instead of just identifying the slopes, intercepts, and intersections from a word problem that I created, algebra students think through estimates and make assumptions to model costs and revenue based on their own individual ideas. The depth of their learning is plain to see when they talk about how raising the price of their headphones design changes the funding needed to get to the point of profitability. Or when they figure out how many cookies their food truck has to actually deliver every hour in order to meet their benchmarks. They are really doing mathematics in the most real way possible. We need every student to have experiences like these. In 2016, the Massachusetts Consortium for Innovative Education Assessment set out to prove that this approach can work. We gathered union leaders and district administrators who agreed that MCAS was causing schools to focus on the measurement instead of on the learning. We found that teachers are eager to create and implement meaningful, curriculum-embedded performance tasks. Now is the time to expand on that work. As the state considers new graduation requirements, portfolios and capstones need to be among the choices. We should invest in the options that will bring teachers on board by respecting their expertise and improve students' classroom experiences by respecting theirs. Thank you.
All right, next, I'm very pleased to introduce Suleika Soto, a Boston parent with children at 2 of the Boston public schools. She joined the St. Stephen's Youth Program's parent organization at the Blackstone School. In a 2019 protest, parents occupied the Boston School Committee chambers, declaring themselves the People's School Committee. Soto was the People's Superintendent at that event. The protest helped win $5 million to install walls and doors needed at the Blackstone School. Soto was a parent organizer and then acting director of the Boston Education Justice Alliance, known as BEJA. Her leadership role in BEJA led her to co-found Families for COVID Safety, or FAMCOSA, fighting to save lives through stronger measures to stop the spread of disease in Boston public schools. BAMCO has members in 125 schools, and I give you Sue back.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is Suleika Soko, and I'm a Boston Public Schools parent and a longtime advocate for public education. I'm here today as a mother of two amazing daughters, two very different kinds of learners, who remind me every single day that no single test can define a child's brilliance or determine their future. One of my daughters has an IEP and is identified as an English language learner. Though English is not her strongest language, she's a hard-working honor roll student, curious and determined. She chose on her own to relearn Spanish so she can better connect with our family in the Dominican Republic. Her teachers say she's ready for advanced classes and even college-level work. Like many students with learning differences or multilingual backgrounds, she doesn't always test well on standardized tests. She struggles with both Access and MCAS, but those scores don't tell her full story. She's outspoken, she's confident, and holds her teachers and me accountable every day. She's the kind of student any school would be proud to have. My other daughter, who's now a senior, is also an honor roll student. She's independent, focused, and a natural leader among her peers. Her test scores have never been a problem. She passed the graduation MCAS the first time with no problem, but that test is no longer required, as you all know. A change that voters in Massachusetts demanded. She's preparing for her next steps with confidence and purpose. Both of my daughters are successful. Both are smart, they're both determined and compassionate. They just show their learning in very different ways. One expresses herself through creativity and persistence, the other through collaboration and leadership. And that's exactly why a one-size-fits-all test can never measure a student's full potential. We also have to be honest about what testing does to our students. The pressure and anxiety around high-stakes tests are very real. Many students spend weeks, even months, preparing for exams that don't reflect what they truly know. On top of MCAS, they already take multiple assessments throughout the year. Benchmarks, diagnostics, end of unit tests, leaving little time for creativity, for exploration, or joy in learning. It's exhausting for them and discouraging for both families and educators alike. When we talk about graduation requirements, we have to ask, what are we really measuring? Are we measuring a student's ability to think critically, to collaborate, to persevere, and to contribute to their community, or just their ability to fill in the right bubble on a test? The Governor's Council on Readiness put forward a strong vision of a graduate, one that values real skills, like problem solving, communication, and civic engagement. That's the direction we should move forward. But replacing MCAS with new end-of-course exams would take us backward, as most folks here said. It would ignore the will of the voters and recreate the same high stakes and barriers that have failed so many of our students, especially those like my children, learning English or living with disabilities. And if we truly want to raise expectations, then we need a budget that matches those expectations. Districts will need the funding and support to make these goals real. More educators, smaller class sizes, language supports, and access to arts, electives, and mental health services. Legislators and state leaders must step up, especially now when federal threats to education funding could make it even harder for our schools to provide what students need to thrive. I want a system where every student can graduate with dignity, recognized for the full range of their abilities and their humanity. Because our children are so much more than their test scores. They are thinkers, they are dreamers, and they are change makers. Voters have already spoken, our kids have already proven what they could do. Now it's time for our leaders to listen and act, to ensure that every student in Massachusetts Graduates ready for life, not just for a test. Thank you.
Okay, 3 more speakers. Next, I'm very proud to introduce Deb McCarthy, Vice President of the 117,000-member Massachusetts Teachers Association, a public education activist who has long worked to strengthen alliances that build strong communities. McCarthy, a longtime 5th grade teacher at the Lillian M. Jacobs Elementary School, was elected to serve as MTA Vice President in May 2022 and again in April 2024. She taught in the Hall Public Schools for 25 years, and I've been proud to fight alongside Deb for a long time for these kinds of positive changes. Thank you. Surprise.
Thank you, Lisa. Those with a lens towards educational equity and justice often say that those closest to the problem should be closest to the solution. As an educator with 25 years closest to the problem, I would like to offer some of my first-hand experience around solutions towards the accountability and assessment regime. When we attach high stakes to an accountability system, like passing the MCAS to receive a diploma, systems will adjust to the nature of the high stakes, and it will become the assessment, and not the learner or the learning, that becomes prioritized. Attaching high stakes to an assessment creates a system, trust me, that teaches to a test, leaving the education of deep learning behind. The definition of accountability, specifically for education, states a policy of holding schools and teachers accountable for students' academic progress. As an observer to the conversations that happen in the Governor's Advisory Council, the word accountability is front and center. And often I hear those who are opposed to question 2 opine that without a standardized end-of-the-year assessment, we abandon the ability to hold educators and school districts accountable for maintaining high standards of alignment and rigor. The argument is that without an accountability system, there is no way of measuring whether or not the algebra class that is taught in Hingham is as rigorous as the one that is taught in Holyoke. I would suggest that this logic is flawed. As an educator, one can design an excellent algebra course and teach it in Hingham, and then the next year, implement the same course in Holyoke, and the end of the year assessment data will be different because we are comparing apples to oranges. The issue of educator accountability is, however, critical. And this is a mandate that is met at the district level with the rigors of an evaluation system that demands that the course design is aligned with the Massachusetts State's framework, often referred to as the gold standards. One of the many ways to hold educators accountable for student learning is indeed assessments, but assessments that are formative, that provide data in real time, assessments that are responsible for maintaining and implementing individualized student academic plans. As an educator, I administer assessments on a daily basis. Assessments align with the frameworks that are standardized, and the data attained from performance assessments and portfolios inherently align to the rigors of our course design as the best practice of backwards design mandates. These assessments are bountiful, relevant, and meaningful. But more importantly, these type of assessments measure deep learning. End of the year course assessments are important, but not when we attach high stakes to them, and not when we hold the student accountable for receiving credit. Accountability systems need to hold the entire educational community system responsible for all of our learners. Accountability needs to address the opportunity gap, and our assessment system needs to finally do the right thing around educational justice. Thank you.
All right, next I'm going to invite Grant Duncan to come up. Grant Duncan is the treasurer of AFT Massachusetts, and he's graciously filling in for President Jessica Tang, who's sick, so I don't have a big long bio.
No problem. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I work with President Tang at AFT Massachusetts. My name is Grant Duncan. I'm the Secretary Treasurer. Like Suleika, I'm a parent. My two daughters are in the Lynn Public Schools. Like Eric, I'm a math teacher. I taught math in the middle schools, in the Lynn Public Schools as well. So it's great to be with you. Thank you. So as educators, we know that true learning is about much more than measured by a single standardized test. That's why we use projects, papers, and group activities to assess students and measure how they're meeting our state's strong academic standards. Whether a student is headed to college or wants to pursue a good job in the trades, they need a well-rounded learning environment where they can learn a diverse set of skills that are needed to succeed in 21st century workforce. Last fall, voters removed a major obstacle for students who work hard in school but struggle with test taking. They generate healthier learning environments for all students. We look at the vote from last fall as an opportunity to rethink teaching and learning in our schools. The feedback has been clear from our educators, from our parents, that we don't need a punitive test-taking system. We do need multiple pathways for our students to demonstrate proficiency and success. Thank you and good morning.
Thank you, Grant. And finally, I introduce to you Max Page, President of the Mass Teachers Association, also a longtime public education activist who believes that the quality of life in our communities depends on having public schools and colleges that meet the needs of every student and family, and probably needs no introduction, so I'll leave it there. Thank you, Max.
Good morning, everyone. And I just want to thank everyone who spoke here. This is the community representing people who won the end of the high stakes MCAS and are promoting a better way of learning in our Commonwealth. So I'm Max Payne, the president of the Mass Teachers Association. We represent 117,000 public school and college educators all across the Commonwealth. I also sit on the Governor's Council on the high school graduation standards. So I just wanted to make crystal clear that we're proud to stand here with Citizens for Public Schools and all those educators, parents, and community members who came to these public forums that have already happened, and there are more to come. This is the community showing up together to answer some simple questions about what we want from our schools, what we want for our students, and how do we teach in a way that provides what we want for them, and how do we assess that. And it's been remarkable what they have been able to do and how they've been able to channel the real views of the broad community of parents, community members, and educators and students. So look, several people have said this, but I really want to underscore, when we won, I mean the broad coalition that won by almost 60-40 the end of the use of MCAS, the high stakes test, we stopped the harm of those testing. I think Delmay spoke about how that high stakes test system actually led for students of color, working class students to have more rote learning rather than a full-bodied education that they deserve. So that was one enormous victory. But the other one is still unwritten, which is that we opened up a chance for a statewide conversation about what we want for our students, what's that vision of the graduate, and how do we organize education in our schools to provide the modern 21st century education. That's the discussion that many advocates here, and there are advocates here who've been at this for decades now. Certainly we in the MTA have filed legislation after legislation calling not only the end of the high-stakes MCAS, but also for a statewide true commission to look at how do we rethink our education in our schools. So we're insisting on having that discussion, and that's what CPS has done, and that is really what we have been trying to do through the council. I agree, though, unfortunately, it is trying to move very, very quickly, but what we need is a true statewide conversation about this. Many other states are moving beyond what I would call a lazy and inaccurate way of measuring student learning, which is a standardized test. New York is an example that's been brought up, a multi-year process that has led to the end of the Regents exam. But also Kentucky and Indiana and Washington State all have explored new ways of providing pathways for their students and new ways of assessing learning. We are Massachusetts. We should be leading the pack, not trying to recreate a system that failed our students. And I think it's very interesting when we talk about, even in the council, people say, well, we need some kind of test. Well, we just have had a 30-year experience of a high-stakes test, and those tests actually still exist. The MCAS is still required. So those who are suggesting that we suddenly need a brand new test are missing the fact that we have an experiment and it did not do what it was supposed to do. The strength of Massachusetts is in the investment in our educators, and in our creation of high standards, not high stakes, and in the funding investment in our schools and our educators. I want to quote, I won't get it exactly right, but paraphrase, I don't think you would argue with this, our new commissioner, Pedro Martinez, said when you are evaluating something complex, like learning, you need complex methods. We need to lean into the complexity. I think that actually is a quote from him, and I appreciate that. That's exactly what we're talking about when you've heard several people talk about performance-based assessments, active learning that engages students in their learning and not the rote learning of standardized tests. So I want to just end by urging everyone here, whether it's reporters or legislators, to think about the most important experiences you had in learning in your high school experience. That may be an academic class. I think about social studies and the intense debate that we structured, the teacher structured around whether or not we should drop the atom bomb. This is a very hot debate, lots of argument, debate, and getting involved in that was I never forgot that experience. I've said to many people, as this refers to the periphery that John Macon has written about, the chorale, singing group. I am no great singer, I'm not going to start singing here. But the experience of what seemed like the periphery is where I learned some of the most important lessons about lots of things that I learned about it, but especially if we're talking about effective communication and collaboration, that was through the chorale. And I heard recently, and I was disappointed at this in a recent council meeting, where someone said, well, if there's no consequence, students really won't invest in it. I think that's actually the exact opposite. When we think about singing groups and arts and sports and debate club, there's no grade involved in that, there's no high stakes test, and yet they invest their passions and energy into that. So I think that is what John Macon is talking about. How do we bring that experience, what's now called the periphery, but actually the most exciting learning, into our classrooms and throughout high school? And that, I will again say, you do not do through a standardized test. So we are going to be committed, and I may mean MTA, but this entire group of advocates, to building an assessment system that promotes the kind of learning that we hope in our high schools and the kind of graduates we hope to be the adults and citizens in this Commonwealth. So I'm so glad everyone's here. I'll turn it back, please.
Thank you, Max. I applaud you, applaud all of our